I'm going to tell you the real reason that Donald Trump is invading Los Angeles, but don't get it twisted with other conspiracy theories or like anything like that. So I'm telling you this as a former right-wing political operative. Villainizing California has long been something that is part of their strategy. The first reason that they do this is because they need to villainize California in smaller red states, and they understand that the majority of small red states don't understand scale or size. So if crime happens a lot, or if anything happens in California, they don't realize that it's, you know, the size of 3 states next to them. And so it's like just incredibly easy to do, to just wait for any travesty. They even have footage of like every riot that's ever happened to recirculate whenever something like this happens. Believe me, the final one's really evil. Californians consistently kind of promote policies, even on the right, that are liberal, but they're so effective and work that if the small people in like Oklahoma, Iowa, Nebraska knew how good like life could be, like having insurance, having a backup plan for insurance for your house in a natural disaster, that kind of thing, then they would not vote the way they do. So they need a place to villainize, and they use it within the context of a culture war. The other reason is this, is that people want to live where things are. This is something else that people that live in rural states don't understand, right? Like there's not concerts, there's no beaches. They live in ugly little towns lined with Casey's, general stores, and Dollar Generals. Well, here's the thing. It's hard to convince people to move there, but the cost of living is really low, whereas a lot of people want to live in California because that's where the stuff is. This creates a problem for the right because they've never been able to manipulate the Electoral College until now. So what the plan has been is that they're going to have states with incredibly low cost of living. One of the ways that they decided to do this in the first phase was, to make sure that these kind of unpopular states don't have any state income tax. So the plan effectively was to have these states not have income taxes as well as be deregulation in hopes that people would move from places like California to their state. The problem was that that still didn't get a lot of people moving there, but what it did do that was beneficial to these red states is it ensured that they would always be electoral strongholds for the right, because the people that would be able to move to South Dakota, North Dakota, were typically richer people anyway, and almost always retirees, which is why the population of 65 and older is the fastest growing population in every one of those states. Enter anti-abortion laws that they haven't pushed on California yet. So what they decided to do after that was to make it easy to become a resident even if you didn't live there. You're going to notice, now that I mention it, that there's a lot of South Dakota license plates, for example, throughout the state of California. Places like South Dakota and Oklahoma are actually gaining residents because they literally, you can go online and become a resident. There's a town in South Dakota that has 6,000 more registered voters than there are residents in the state, right? And they call these people nomadic. So people from California, California loses a person from their population, and these little states like South Dakota gain one. But here's the thing, South Dakota is so small, and the way that the Electoral College and the census is set up is so fucked up that those states can only gain a seat, right? Because we only have one congressperson. And even though no matter how much South Dakota grows, it's always going to have more representation than the people of California. California has gotten so big that it could seriously only lose Electoral College points. And they've already made predictions. The second and more fascist phase of this was to actually split Californians into groups based on haves and have-nots, knowing that the haves are always going to want lower tax policies, or they will leave to another state. And with the understanding that as these natural disasters happen, if there's not enough federal funding, that the poorest people of California are going to have to move. And so this is especially true if they don't have certain programs. So they decided to villainize FEMA for a while. In this new proposed legislation, they want to change the way that people are counted. Number one, the thing that the census wants to change themselves is the way the prison population counts. They want to count people from where they're actually going to live when they're out of prison, because we have such high incarceration rates. So what the right decided to do was build as many prisons as possible in their states, and then that way they could earn another seat because it goes towards their population. But the thing is, blue states are far more likely to want to invest in prisons because it's not popular. So they get them there. But then as there is kind of this exodus, they wanted to make sure that California lost enough people, as would places like Seattle, etc. So in this legislation, in addition to banning counting people from counting where they're from and being forced to be counted in the prison that these Republicans are building in order to grow their state, they are also going to try to not count any immigrants at all. So you have to be fully documented in a U.S. citizen. But here's the thing. They used the 2024 election to practice what it would look like challenging who is a citizen, because most of the votes that they said, well, they didn't check the box or whatever, they can use the same thing on the census to even further drive down who participates in it. And this is only going to impact blue states. So if you look at the new map per the projections, should this legislation be passed, the Electoral College would change in such a way that Kamala Harris could have won the entire blue wall and still lost this election.